Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and today we're dedicating the show to an old man, to an old, decrepit, need to go in retirement individual, the one, the only Godzilla. And the reason we're talking Godzilla today, the reason this show is dedicated solely on Godzilla. Did you realize that 2024 is the 70th anniversary of the very first Godzilla film, which came out in 1954? Yes, 70 years of Godzilla. And we just recently got a Godzilla film. And I say that with heavy quotations, Godzilla and Kong, the New Empire, which was all right. Don't count that as a Godzilla film, but I will count Godzilla -1, which came out last year, or should I say the Academy Award winning Godzilla -1, which won for Best Visual Effects in this year's Academy Awards. Now that was a Godzilla film. Now that was a return to form. Beautiful film. But Godzilla has been a staple in so many households, so many people who, like me, who used to watch Creature Feature on Saturdays. The old kaiju films, those old monster movies, whether it was King Kong or, Godzilla versus Mothra or something stupid like that. It was a whole bunch of creature feature films, and they sprinkled in some monster films in there, and Godzilla was one of the many films that they showcased. And just like millions around the world, I fell in love with Godzilla films, and monster films as a whole, to be honest with you. But it was something about Godzilla that stood out among them all, mainly because Godzilla is the king of the monsters. He is. Yes, there's Kong. Yes, there's King Kong. I understand all that. But Godzilla just had that, it was something about it that just made it special. But Godzilla is a Japanese monster or a kaiju media franchise consisting of films, TV shows, novels, comic books, video games, and many other pieces of media and marketing and merchandising. The franchise is centered around the fictional kaiju Godzilla, a prehistoric reptilian monster awakened and powered by nuclear radiation. And so the franchise is recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records, get this, as the longest running film franchise, having been in ongoing production since 1954. The film franchise consists of 38 films. 38 films in this franchise. 33 of them are Japanese films produced and distributed by Toho, and 5 American films. The first of which was produced by TriStar Pictures, that I think they came out in 96, 97, somewhere up in there. And the remaining 4 were produced by Legendary Pictures, including the latest one, which we just talked about, Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire. The original film, Godzilla, was directed by and co-written by Ishio Honda and released by Toho in 1954. It became an influential classic of the genre. It featured political and social undertones relevant to Japan at that time. Let's do a little history on Godzilla. See, the Godzilla film series is broken into several different eras. The first, second, and fourth eras reflect to the Japanese emperor. The third era is called the Millennium Era, as the emperor is the same, but these films are considered to have a different style and storyline than the other eras that we mentioned earlier. Over the series history, the films have reflected the social and political climate in Japan. In the original film, Godzilla was the symbol or the manifestation of the atomic bomb, you know, and the consequences that such weapons will have on planet Earth. So Godzilla was never meant to be just a smashy, stomp monster movie. You know, it actually had messaging behind it, and that was a very strong message, especially in Japan. You know, who were affected by these massive bombs that America dropped on them during World War II. And so, even though Godzilla is the most celebrated, the most loved of all the monster films, he wasn't the first. He wasn't the first to do that, and wasn't the first to have a political message about what took place in Japan in the 50s. Now, Toho was inspired to make the original Godzilla film after the critical success of the 1952 re release of King Kong and the success of the Beast from 20,000 Phantoms in 1953. This is the first live action film to feature a giant monster awakening following an atomic bomb detonation. The success of the Godzilla franchise itself would go on to inspire other giant monster films worldwide. The popularity of the films has led to the franchise expanding to other medias. You know, there were also television show. There was a cartoon. There was a cartoon that came out in the 90s, I think it was, or late 80s. I can't remember. I barely watched it for reasons, music, literature, video games, all type. Every form of media, Godzilla has touched it. Godzilla has become one of the most recognizable symbols in Japanese pop culture worldwide and remains a well known facet of Japanese cinema and was one of the first examples of the popular kaiju subgenre in Japanese entertainment. The tone and themes vary depending on which film you watch. Several of the films have political themes, others have dark tones, complex internal mythology, or are simple action films featuring aliens and other monsters. You know, you remember Godzilla versus Space Godzilla? Godzilla versus I don't know. There was Son of Godzilla. There was it was just a whole bunch of silly ones. All monsters attack. It was a whole bunch of them that came out, and they would just it just got sillier and sillier. It was almost like this was the precursor to the Fast and the Furious franchise. How it just got sillier every one, and every one they made, and that's how Godzilla was. But you loved it for what it was. Um, while others had simpler themes, I guess you could say suitable for children, like I mentioned before, you know, Son of Godzilla and stuff like that. Godzilla roles vary from purely a destructive force to actually being an ally to humans or the protector of Japanese values and a hero to the children. You know, it just kept going on. It this is why I always say Hollywood is nothing new in Hollywood. They always do things, you know, it's not plagiarism. It's more that it's nothing really original. You remember when Terminator came out, right? In 1984. Terminator came out. It was just the greatest thing ever. Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was this unstoppable robot, cyborg killing machine. And so when T2 came out and he was the hero, it was kind of a shock. But, you know, it's we've seen this before, you know. Godzilla made a turn. Godzilla went from destroying Japan to being the hero of Japan in various sequels after that initial film. Speaking of the Fast and the Furious franchise, you realize how every villain in the Fast and the Furious franchise turns out to be a hero later on. They join Vin Diesel's team. They become family. you know, later on down the line, even though they were just trying to kill him 2 days or two films earlier. It's that type of stuff. It just that's Hollywood. You just deal with it. But the name Godzilla is a romanization of the original Japanese name Gojira, which is a combination of two Japanese words, Gotra, meaning gorilla, and Kajira, meaning whale. And I think I said those names right. I hope I did. But you get the point. The word alludes to the size and power and ability to swim underwater or even live underwater. As developed by Toho, the monster is an offshoot of a combination of radioactivity and ancient dinosaur like creatures, indestructible and possessing superpowers. Because Godzilla can shoot laser beams out his mouth, so there's that as well. Touching in on these forms of media that I keep hinting at, television. In Japan in 1973, Godzilla was featured in Toho's series Zone Fighter, which also featured King Ghidorah in a few episodes. Several filmmakers who had worked on the previous Godzilla films participated in that series. In 1992, Toho produced a children's educational animated series entitled Godzilla Land, which featured live action segments mixed with this manga style animation. In 1997, Toho produced a children's series entitled Godzilla Island, centered on Godzilla toys. Toho made the series available worldwide on their official YouTube channel in November of 2022. In October of 2020, Toho announced Godzilla Singular Point, an anime series that aired on Japanese television in April of 2021 and released worldwide on Netflix in June of 2021. Now, over in the United States, Godzilla and his likeness has appeared in various television related media with Robot Chicken, Roseanne, Animaniacs, South Park, Malcolm in the Middle, even the Chappelle Show, Rugrats, Nike commercials with Charles Barkley playing one-on-one against Godzilla. I remember that commercial. In multiple appearances on The Simpsons, including a Halloween special, their Treehouse of Horror yearly shows entitled Homerzilla. I remember that episode. In 1978, Hanna-Barbera produced an animated series, Godzilla, and it ran for 2 seasons on NBC. In 2022, Toho made the complete Hanna-Barbera series available worldwide on their official YouTube channel. In 1991, the English dub versions, Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster and Godzilla vs. Megalodon, was spoofed on Mystery Science Theater 3000. In 1998, Columbia TriStar Television produced Godzilla the series. This is the one I remember. It was 98. I thought it was earlier than that. I didn't realize it was that late. I guess it was around the release of that horrible film that starred Matthew Broderick and directed by Roman Emmerich. Oh my God, that movie was horrible. But anyway, I guess this went with the release of that. And it was a series that served as a sequel to that film, to be exact. And it ran for 2 seasons on Fox Kids. In January of 2022, Legendary Television announced that Apple TV Plus has ordered a live action series set in the Monsterverse, and that came out last year, and it was entitled Monarch Legacy of Monsters, and that was a really, really good show. I liked that first season. I haven't heard anything about the second season, but I really enjoyed that. Kurt Russell, his son Wyatt Russell, plays a younger version of him on the show. It's really, really good. But it's linked up with this Monsterverse films that has came out as of late. As far as the cultural impact of Godzilla, you have Godzilla being considered the original radioactive superhero due to his accidental radioactive origin story. Um, Kind of similar. Now, this ain't me saying it. These are the creators saying it. It's similar, and it predates Spider-Man, which debuted in 1962. And so it kind of has similarities to how Godzilla gained his powers and Spider-Man gained his, or any other superhero in comics, if you want to be completely honest. But though Godzilla did not become a hero until 1964, he, he's still considered a hero to this day. And as of late, in these Godzilla versus Kongs and Godzilla King of the Monsters and all that good stuff, they really made him the hero of those films. In the 1970s, Godzilla became to be viewed as a superhero with the magazine King of the Monsters in 1977, describing Godzilla as superhero of the 70s. In 1973, Godzilla was voted the most popular movie monster in the Movie Times poll, beating, here's the list now, he beat out Count Dracula, King Kong, Wolfman, The Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and Frankenstein's monster. Well, I don't think that was a contest. That wasn't much of a that wasn't much of a contest, but he won nonetheless. In 2010, the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society named their most recent acquisition scout vessel MV Gojira, which is the translation Godzilla. Toho, the people in charge of the Godzilla franchise, served them with a with a notice to remove the name, and in response, the boat's name was changed in May of 2011 to the MV Bridget Bardot. Now, I don't know the significance behind that name, but they made them change it. I guess because they weren't getting any ducats, you know, they weren't getting any money from that name being strolled across that boat. But it is what it is. Steven Spielberg, the great Steven Spielberg, cited Godzilla as his inspiration for Jurassic Park, which is a no-brainer, in that epic scene when the T-Rex gets out of his enclosure. That was Godzilla written all over it. To be more specific, he was inspired by the 1956 film Godzilla King of the Monsters, which he grew up watching. During this production, Steven Spielberg described Godzilla as the most masterful of all the dinosaur movies because it made you believe it was really happening. Godzilla also influenced Steven Spielberg's first blockbuster, the 1975 film Jaws. Godzilla has also been cited as the inspiration for Tim Allen, Martin Scorsese, and Tim Burton. They cite Godzilla as the film Godzilla as their inspiration to get into acting and making movies and having the careers that they have. And I think that's interesting, man. That is very interesting, especially coming from somebody. I can see Tim Burton, but Martin Scorsese, because he never did a big movie like that, you know, a monster movie, a special effects heavy movie. He had special effects in his films, but I mean, you know, a blockbuster type film. But nonetheless, you don't know where your inspiration would come from or what's inspiring a lot of our artists out there in the world. But it is a interesting lens to look through for that, for the inspiration for those individuals. Of course, when we talk about Godzilla -1 and how it won for best visual effects, it it was probably one of the best visually stunning monster movies I've ever seen in my life. And it is a far cry from from watching a man in a rubber suit, which is what Godzilla was. The original movies, you know, him stomping around. It is such a far cry, but it's something about those films. You can still watch them today and still find joy and happiness and uh, uh, relevancy in those films, even though you know that's a man in a suit, you know. But the movies are so campy, and they're meant to be that. They weren't trying to be more than what they were. And yeah, you can link it to budget restraints to why they had to have a man in a rubber suit. We didn't have CGI. Industrial light and magic wasn't around 70 years ago. And so this is what you had. And this is they did the best they could with it, but it still holds up. Those old films still hold up, and it's still a joy to watch. So, like I said, there are 38 Godzilla films, and I'm not going to torture you all and go through all 38 and rate them and review them all. So, what I decided to do is do my top 5. I'm just going to do 5. My top 5 Godzilla films. And this was tough. This was hard. This is why I decided just to do 5, because it was so tough to put this list together just with 5. And I'm still internally arguing with this 5. These are my 5 favorites, but it's more of an internal struggle with the order. But I am happy with this. I've settled on this. It took me 2 days to kind of really settle in on this particular order, and I feel comfortable with it. But I'm scared that after I release this episode, I'm going to listen to it and think back like, no, I should have put that at 3, or I should have moved that to I'm scared of that. But as it stands right now, this is the 5, and we're going to start with number 5 of my top 5 best Godzilla films. At number 5, we have the 1962 film King Kong versus Godzilla. This was the first kind of cinematic crossover film that I witnessed growing up. How cool would it be if King Kong fought Godzilla? Now, granted, this film came out 15 years or almost 20 years before I was even thought of. But, the order I seen them in, I didn't get to see it. So I had to wait to see it. And I saw it in the, mid 80s maybe. And I always wanted to see those two clash, clash on screen, until I think it was either my dad or my brother who told me, oh, there's a movie. They fought. I'm like, really? And that's how I end up watching this version of Godzilla. Yes, King Kong versus Godzilla. This is before Godzilla versus Kong, which we got a few years ago, a couple of years ago to be exact. But this is not only the first time these two kaijus or titans linked up or went at each other, but this is also the first time in a Godzilla film that it was shot in color. This is the first one. It's the third entry into this franchise, and it holds the moniker of "It's so bad, it's good." It's one, it's one of those, and it's not, you know, it as I described this film series earlier, it's cheesy and campy, and it has corny humor. It has all that, but that's what you watch it for. In my review of Godzilla X Con, the New Empire, which came out a couple of weeks ago, I stated that, look, it wasn't a good movie, but if you're going to see monsters fighting and stomping around and all that, you'll be happy. You'll be happy, and that's all I wanted to see. I just wanted to see King Kong and Godzilla go at it, and they did. And around that time, it was a joy to watch, and I loved every second of it when we did get it. It wasn't a lot of it, but it was good enough for me, and it still has a lasting impact on me to this day, to the point when we got the 2021 film, I was all in, because I'm like, all right, we have updated special effects. There's so much more they can do with it, not to replace the original film from 1962, but to kind of add on to the lore. King Kong versus Godzilla from 1962 comes in at number 5. And since we were squawking about about the 2021 film Godzilla versus King Kong, or Godzilla versus Kong to be more accurate, it comes in at number 4. I'm actually shocked in a way that it's this high. I'm actually surprised by that. But after thinking about it and rewatching it a couple of weeks ago in preparation for the new Godzilla and Kong film, I was pleasantly surprised by that film. More so than when I first saw it. When I first saw it, I enjoyed it. But it was something about watching it this go around. I was just all in on it, man. It had a sense of joy and wonder to it, that kind of revitalized the franchise. And think about it. This movie during the pandemic, during the pandemic, made monster, no pun intended, numbers. It made millions at the box office. And this is including not only a pandemic where people weren't really returning to the theaters at that time, it was released on HBO Max at the same time. So you didn't even have to go to the theater to watch it. You could have watched it at home. But people chose to go to the theater to go see it, because a movie like this needs to be seen on the big screen, man. I mean, come on. Two giant monsters going at it. It was beautiful. And I went to go see it in the theater, and I was not disappointed by it. But it was a very good movie, including the human character. Even the human characters, which I normally despise in these movies, I enjoyed them in this film. So Godzilla versus Kong from 2021 comes in at number 4 on my top 5 list of Godzilla films. Coming in at number 3 is another oldie. This was released in 1964, and it is none other than Mothra versus Godzilla. And this film is in a class within itself. I remember watching this, in one of the creature features and being in awe of it. It was like a fantasy film. It kind of took Godzilla in another direction as far as storyline and the special effects at the time. It was different. It was new. It was vibrant, and Mothra making an appearance, the queen of the monsters, if you will. It was something different, something new and exciting, other than him fighting, Mega Godzilla and all these other crazy things, Destroyer and all these other monsters and kaijus that pop up. It was Mothra is a different animal, no pun intended. It was a different beast, and I actually enjoyed it immensely, and that's why it lands at number 3 on my top 5 list of Godzilla films. Mothra versus Godzilla from 1964. Coming in at number 2 is, look, the number 2 and number 1. I know this is where a lot of controversy will probably come from, or maybe not. I don't know, but you have to understand my reasoning, and I will give my reasoning when I tell you what number 1 is. But coming in at number 2 is a film that just came out last year, the 2023 Godzilla Minus One. Godzilla Minus One is as close to a perfect Godzilla film you're going to get. It is amazing. It's difficult to believe that after 70 years, you get a film like this out of this franchise. It is hard to wrap your head around. And this movie managed to tell a human story now, a very human story. Just so happened you have this giant kaiju running around destroying Japan. Now the visual effects in this film, it goes without saying. I don't need to harp on that. It won Best Visual Effects at the Academy Award. What more do I need to say? But it really tackles real world issues in this film, PTSD and survivor's guilt, and so much thing, overcoming grief. a lot of mental issues, or mental health issues that I wasn't expecting. And it's good surprises. Normally, you go to one of these movies and get horrible surprises, but in this case, no, it was all good. I love this movie. I love this movie. It was one of my favorite movies of 2023, and it's one of my favorite Godzilla films of all time, coming in at number two. Now, you may ask yourself, after listening to me just gush over Godzilla minus one, how can that not be number one? Well, it's for nostalgic reasons. Number one, it's for we wouldn't have this if it wasn't for the number one. And I'm talking about not only this show, but this conversation about this subject if it wasn't for my number one Godzilla film of all time. And it is, of course, the 1954 film Godzilla. I mean, we wouldn't have Godzilla if it wasn't for Godzilla from 1954. If Godzilla is indeed the king of the monsters, uh, this was a masterwork by Ishiro Honda, the director, co-writer of the 1954 film. It's a dark fantasy film. It's shot with this kind of documentary news crew type style. The metaphors and the horror of war and the symbolism that Godzilla had uh, uh, to showcase what happened with the atomic bomb and the aftermath of the atomic bomb and how it affected Japan. And it was all wrapped up in a metaphor of this giant kaiju named Godzilla. And it resonated so hard. It resonated so deep and so poignantly that 70 years later, we are still receiving Godzilla films, good or bad, for better or worse. We're still getting Godzilla films, and we're still holding on hope of a good Godzilla film. I mean, if we would have gave up hope 5 years ago, we never would have got Godzilla minus one. If we would have gave up hope 10 years ago, we never would have got Godzilla versus Kong. We never would have received this MonsterVerse, Monarch on television and stuff. So we kept keep giving into hope, if I can get it out, of this franchise, of this character, and we're constantly being rewarded with it. And it's a joy. It's truly a joy. And it all started in 1954 with Godzilla. And so to go through my list yet again, my top five Godzilla films. Number one, of course, is the 1954 Godzilla. Number two is the 2023 film Godzilla minus one. Coming in at number three is Mothra versus Godzilla from 1964. Coming in at number four, Godzilla versus Kong from 2021. And at number five, we have King Kong versus Godzilla from 1962. I do have some honorable mentions in there. I guess I can put in there. I don't have numbers for them, but these are still some Godzilla films that I did enjoy. Well, I enjoyed a majority of the 38 films for what they are, but uh, these almost made the list. If I was doing a top 10, these probably would be on the list. But like I said, I just stuck with five to keep my sanity intact. There was Destroy All Monsters from 1968. That was just a free for all. There was just a buku monsters, man. It was like the Avengers Assemble of monster movies. That one was a good one. Godzilla King of the Monsters from 2019 was also a good one. I wanted to like that movie more, but it just, I don't know. It just didn't quite get there, even though I did enjoy it, but it just couldn't crack into the top five. Godzilla from 2014, wanted to like that more. It had all the elements. It had everything there for it. It just didn't work. One, you barely saw Godzilla in the movie. You barely saw it. You had Bryan Cranston in this movie. I mean, everything was there, but for some strange reason, it just didn't quite get there. It had some enjoyable scenes in it, enough for me to say that I liked it, but not enough in it to say that, oh man, I loved Godzilla from 2014. Yeah, those are a few of the films that just could not crack into the top five. But I mentioned a film earlier in the show that I consider one of the worst films I ever saw in my life, and it is a Godzilla film, and it's none other than Godzilla from 1998. This movie, I, I'm gonna take time. I'm gonna take the time and actually break down this movie, and it's weird. I didn't break down the good ones like I'm gonna break down this one, and the reason is because this movie to this day still doesn't make a lick of sense to me. This movie, I, I still scratch my head as to how this movie got made and why they thought that this movie was going to be successful. I have no idea. But the promotion and the hype and the lead up to this film is the stuff of legends, man. The hype behind the 1998 Godzilla film is unreal. This is what summer movies was all about back then. The hype behind movies, and it hasn't been duplicated since. I think they stopped after this. This movie ruined the promotional tactics of studios. It is it is that bad of a film. This film was directed by Roland Emmerich, and him and his producing partner at the time, Devlin, they're fresh off of the success of Independence Day. Independence Day, which was the one of the best hyped movies ever, and it lived up to the hype, the excitement. And so we thought we were going to get a carbon copy of that, but with a kaiju. Man, were we disappointed here? This movie starred Matthew Broderick, Hank Azaria, Kevin Dunn. It was this movie was horrible. This movie was so bad. Number one, you had Godzilla. They changed the design of Godzilla for one. That was mistake number one. This is the late 90s. And so everything had to be kind of muscular. Even in comic books, you notice how Todd McFarlane drew his characters with these protruding muscles and all this other stuff. Everything had to look muscular in the 90s. And so they made Godzilla look like a bodybuilder. He looked like a coked up, steroid using Komodo dragon. He didn't look like a kaiju. It was so silly. The silliest design they could ever do for Godzilla. Then they went ahead and made Godzilla a mama and laid eggs in the what was it, Madison Square Garden and all this other stuff. I'm like, what is this? What is going on right now? And it was like watching Jurassic Park at point when those the eggs hatched and the little Godzillas were running around chasing everybody like they were velociraptors and all. I'm like, what is this movie? What is this? Godzilla didn't have his atomic blast out of his mouth. None of that. This was just silly, man. And they redubbed it. They did a trademark. They kind of what's the term I'm looking for here? Course correct later on down the line and said that wasn't Godzilla. Instead, they called it Zilla. they dropped the God out of it because God had nothing to do with this movie, I guess. But it was that embarrassing to Toho, who helped produce this reboot. This was supposed to be the start of a new trilogy or a new franchise or whatever. And it bombed miserably, and it should have. This movie shouldn't have been made. It was so bad. And you can look past the Godzilla flaws, just like you can look past all of that in the other 30 something films in the franchise. I can look past some of that, but I can't look past the human story. If the humans don't connect with me, the movie suffers. Just like I felt about this most recent Godzilla and Kong film, The New Empire. I didn't connect with the human characters. That's why the movie suffered, and but it wasn't as bad as this. This movie had zero heart. The characters weren't compelling. Nobody you can really cheer for or get behind. It was none of that. None of that. And they took a lot of time with the human characters to develop, but they didn't. It just didn't work at all. And it hurt me then because I had a lot of high hopes for that. And this was like the first Godzilla film that I would get to go see in the theater, I never got to experience going to see Godzilla films in the theater. The majority of them came out before I was even born. And so this was my first time being able to go see Godzilla on a big screen, and that's it. It was trash. Godzilla from 1998 gets a letter grade of a D minus. I want to give it an F, but there were some elements in it that were entertaining, like when Godzilla first arrived in New York, and the special effects for the time were pretty good. But other than that, this movie was bad, man. This was not a good movie at all. But it didn't deter me from Godzilla the character, Godzilla the franchise, because the very next one that came out about 10 years later or whatever, I was right there for it. Super excited. These MonsterVerse films, I'm there for each and every one of them. Super excited. I love this franchise. I love this genre. And man, I cannot wait for more. But yes, 70 years of Godzilla. 70 years. Wow. The old man looks good for his age, man. Still getting around. I guess it's all that radiation. But what is your favorite Godzilla film? Are you a Godzilla fan? Did you grow up watching all these films, and are you still going to see them? Did you go see the recent Godzilla X Con, the New Empire, and all this here? I would love to know what's your top 5 out of the 38 films in this franchise. 38 and still going strong. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also look up the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, subscribe and like this video on YouTube. Just look for the KB Radio Network channel. Also, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me as we celebrate 70 years of Godzilla. Can't wait to speak to you on the next 70 years for the 140th year of Godzilla. If I'm around by then, I don't know, man. I would say put me out my misery, but don't do that. I'm just let me ride off into the sunset my way. In any event, I want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.